So they let him in and we're doing the wants and needs. And he put friendship on the
Mhm.
needs, right? And everybody, oh, no, 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 you're not going to die without friends. You're going to die if you don't have food, but you're not going to die without friends. And he said, a life without friends is not a life worth living. I think friends are a need. And he made his little 8-year-old case, and people were crying. And the kid that nobody thought would be interested or useful in the meeting was the most brilliant. And I find that young kids often have that level of wisdom.
Welcome to Planning Reimagined, a podcast from the planning experts at Robin Glenn and RX Investment Partners for wealthy families and successful business owners. 'Tis the season for family gatherings, delicious food, and maybe financial conversations. While maybe having money talks over pie is not your preferred way to spend the holidays, with families rarely together, the holidays are a great opportunity to have these important conversations. So if you've thought about bringing this up with your family, but even the thought of it stresses you out and you don't know where to start, you have come to the right place, because today our expert is going to share insights on how to make those potentially awkward conversations into productive family planning sessions. Welcome back to Planning Reimagined, where your wealth journey meets our expert insights. I'm your host, Celeste Moya, and today we are diving into the very important topic of tackling those crucial financial conversations with your family without turning them into a financial debate. So joining me today is my partner in crime and also in business, Kris Stiegel. And we are super thrilled to have with us Jeff Savlov, founder of Blum and Savlov. He's a family business and wealth consultant. And Jeff specializes in guiding family businesses and high net worth families through all the complexities at the intersection of family wealth and family dynamics. So Jeff, thank you so much for joining us today. We're really looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, me too. Thanks for having me.
Yes, of course. So let's get started because we have a lot to get through. And Jeff, I think the best place to start is with your very own story, your background, which has kind of led you to where you are today. And in previous conversations, you mentioned how much your own family story significantly influenced your career and what you're doing now. So can you share how your personal experiences motivated your career and also shaped how you navigate these complexities with other families?
Sure. Yeah. Happy to do that. We'll go back to my dad graduates high school and goes into the army during the Korean War. He was in Germany and he learned printing as a trade, printing maps for the war effort, comes back, works for other people, blue collar union guy, and always kind of chafed at working for somebody else. He was a skilled craftsman, never ran an organization, never was in management, more of a skilled technical guy. So somehow he saved his pennies. Mom was a stay-at-home mom and got us some equity in a house in the suburbs and sat down me and my older and younger sister at some point to say, hey, mom and dad sat us down and said, this is what we're doing. It's kind of risky. Dad's going to be working really hard in New York City, starting his own company. And, it's going to be kind of stressful, and explain to us a little bit about the kind of risks they were taking in a way that we could understand. And it was exciting and scary. It sounded like if it didn't work out, it was going to be a little rough. And so he went with that, and it took off. And he was out of his league in terms of never having run an organization, and he got stressed out. And I may have asked you this when we spoke, I'm not sure, but what I typically do at this point is look somebody who can answer and say, who do you think he took his stress out on? Anybody want to take a guess? And some people will take a guess. Some people, out of politeness, don't want to say, hey, Jeff, we think it was you, but that would be the right answer. It was me. My older and younger sisters knew better than to go anywhere near it. Dad, it was a great, friendly guy, and he had a temper. And certainly this kind of situation was likely to be high stress. Where it really got interesting and transformational for me, for my relationship with my dad, for the whole family, was my mom, in her wisdom, found a psychologist that worked with families in business together. And it was a specialty that was just starting back, in the 80s. There wasn't much of that happening. And so my dad and I reached out and said, hey, we'd like to work with you, father and son, having some issues. And the first thing she did that really stuck with me to this day is she said, no, I work with families. You're a father and son. You said there's a mom, there's a couple of sisters. Even though they're not involved in the business, I want to meet the whole crew. So that was interesting and turned out to be brilliant. She knew what she was doing. And then she was exploring my dad's anger with him. And she was asking him about the family he grew up in, and it started to focus on his father. So this is my dad talking about his father to the whole family. We had never heard much about it. We knew there was some kind of Jewish Holocaust, something or other, but it wasn't really talked about. And when my dad started explaining that his father had escaped the Nazis, made his way to America, and he basically got his mother out, but lost the rest of his family. And I don't know if I told you this part when we spoke initially, kind of briefly, but basically he got his mother out. The rest of the family was wiped out, and he lied to his mother and basically made up stories about the family who were all dead so that she wouldn't have to go to her
Mhm.
grave knowing that everyone was wiped out. So my dad was raised by a guy that was holding that kind of stuff inside. And one of the ways that it came out was, and the therapist was asking my dad about anger in the family and his parents. My dad's father was stressed and traumatized and angry and would frequently use the belt, which back in the 30s, 40s was not all that unusual. It sounds like my dad had it pretty rough with the belt and all that. And he says, well, as he's telling us all this, he said, when I was going through all this, I said to myself, I knew I was going to have kids one day. And I said to myself, I would never raise a hand to my kids. And in that moment, in Hollywood, often, and there's a therapy scene and some little thing happens and it changes somebody's life, and it's usually not very accurate. But I guess sometimes it happens because in that moment, there was a lot that was useful about the work we did with that psychologist. But in that moment, it was so powerful because we just knew him as this sort of big, angry guy that we didn't totally understand. He always seemed angry about something. And in that moment, we saw him in a totally different light, which was that he made this amazing transformational is the word I can think of, and I keep using decision to never lay a hand on us. And so he went from like this angry guy to this loving guy in that moment, like 6'3", 285 pounds, hitting would have hurt. And so we really, all of us, me and my sisters, got to see him in this totally different way. He had broken a cycle that often doesn't get broken. He did it out of love before he even had us kids and stuck with it. It was just incredibly, incredibly moving. And it just had such a fundamental shift. It's hard to even find the words to describe an experience like that and how much it affected my life and my relationship with him. And I said, you know what? I don't love this whole commercial printing thing, and I'm doing it to help you. I was going in on weekends in middle school and then high school and college. I was still heavily involved. I said, let me do my thing. I'm studying, marketing. Let me go into the marketing corporate world separate from family business. We'll be father and son. You do your thing here. He was fully supportive. Everything was great. Our relationship got better and better. I worked in sales and marketing and consumer products and technology. I had a really, really good run at a young age, actually. And I just kept thinking about what that therapist did for us. And I thought, that's really what I want to do. If I could do that for families, that would just be, it was amazing to be on the client patient side. I'd like to be on the professional side and have that be a career, a calling, really. So I moved back with my parents in my late 20s. Now they're roommates, which was a whole other kind of fun way to sort of heal some of the old stuff and have new relationships. And I went back to grad school, studied family and group dynamics, did a lot of work around child development and parenting, which comes into play later. All this comes together totally by accident. Went to a psychoanalytic institute for 7 years after grad school, which no one really does anymore. And 30 years ago, I started a private practice, and I really thought that was where I was going to be. And it just so happened that some of my early therapy clients 30 years ago had generational wealth, some with operating businesses, some didn't have operating businesses, but maybe a business had been sold, it recently or even 3, 4, 5 generations ago. And they had still significant assets that needed coordination, right? They still had to make decisions around, real estate investments, trusts, a foundation, right? They still own stuff together. They had to make decisions. They had to figure out how they were going to give it to the next generation, complicated stuff. And I'm working as a therapist, just, marriage counseling or teenagers out of control kinds of stuff. But I was hearing all these other things. And I said, there's something here that's needed. That's not what we think of as therapy, but, accountants and attorneys and wealth managers don't have this kind of training. And I had this, family business experience and then corporate business experience and all this psychological family dynamics training. And I just saw there was an opportunity. And so 30 years ago, I started to do consulting, which wasn't therapy, but certainly built on all the training I had had. And over the last 30 years, built it so that I'm really helping family ownership groups, families that have businesses, families that have legacy wealth without a business. And, I mentioned that I had this expertise from graduate school and some of my early therapy work with really young children in child development and parenting. And as I'm working with these families, and over the course of my career, the families got, larger and larger and more complicated. So many of the really challenging family dynamics issues or entitlement issues that I would run into that people wanted me to fix, it really came down to misparenting opportunities in early childhood. And I'd say under 5 years old, often 1, 2, 3-year-old opportunities, simple things that people were missing. And I saw opportunities for couples in these families before they even had kids to get some education about parenting in this special context. I like to say poor and working class people can benefit from 90% of the stuff I talk to these really wealthy families about when it comes to parenting. But that extra 10% is specific to really wealthy families. And there is some opportunity there that, a lot of times people weren't even talking about the wealth until kids were in college and their personalities and styles. And if they were already spoiled, they were already spoiled by their 20s. And so those opportunities were missed. So forgive me if that was a long-winded
No,
answer
that
to
was
your
great.
question, but that's the whole shebang.
That's an incredible story. I mean, thank you for giving us all the details. I don't think Kris and I really appreciated the first time you shared it because of all the additional details. A couple of things. What a progressive psychologist that was at that point in time. And I just want to let you know the belt was still popular in the 80s, at least with my Mexican mom. So I don't know when that went out of style, as of recently, probably. But, it's so, I mean, just kind of dissecting what you shared, there's so many things that we don't necessarily correlate to how we handle financials, planning, wealth, and that is deep rooted because of how our experiences when we were younger. And that goes back generationally.
Yeah.
And these folks that have generational wealth and that have amassed this significant wealth, it's so important for them to be able to sometimes break these cycles that have been created over time. So that, I mean, all of that you shared is so incredibly interesting. I know Kris and I have dealt with many families where similar situations, there's just different family dynamics. The children, we're working with a family right now where the grandfather's concerned about the grandchildren being too complacent. He said, I don't want to raise beach grandchildren. He said, I want working motivated grandchildren. So it's just different generations, different ways of approaching it. Kris, I don't know if you have anything to add.
Did you say beach?
Yeah, he said, I don't want to raise beach grandchildren, or I don't want my kids to raise beach grandchildren. I want them
Like
to
they're
be
just hanging out at the beach?
Right. Yeah, exactly.
That's funny because one of the things I say is, my clients are looking to me to help make sure that their grandkids aren't dropping acid and hanging out surfing on the beaches of Hawaii. So there's a beach theme in there.
Yeah, I guess it's the being lazy on the beach concept. But Kris, you were going to say something. Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's just this whole idea and the family dynamics is so interesting because you're just mentioning worried about the next generation going to, the grandchildren going to the beach. I've got a bunch of families that I work with. They're worried about, their kids going to the beach. So they're more interested in helping out their grandchildren. Like it's more like skipping, quote unquote, beach generation.
Right.
All of a sudden. And in my experience, it's like, it's not a right or wrong thing. It's just a lot of times I just don't think that they're communicating effectively. Maybe they just don't understand their children or their grandchildren or their view of the world is maybe different. One thing that I'm kind of curious about, because I think this is probably important. It's certainly important to me as I look at how to make introductions. But like, how do you work with a family, or how do you get in front of them and help them make that leap? Because a lot of the individuals that we work with, a lot of times it is an individual or it's a matriarch, patriarch, and they are they've got very strong personalities, we'll say. So sometimes it can be difficult to kind of break in that mold and say, you know what, I think you should probably consider talking to somebody about these types of, what's going on with your family and intergenerational wealth. Like, how do you get people to take that leap with you?
Yeah, so usually I am referred by professionals. So either families read something I wrote, or they hear me speak, and something sort of hits and rings a bell and makes sense, or the professional has to sort of say something that makes it make sense. And so I usually recommend the professional say something like, you're in a pretty tricky situation. Everyone thinks having significant financial wealth is this wonderful thing, and poor and working class people dream about it. The truth is, it's a lot more complicated, as you're starting to find out. There are people who are experts in this sort of emotional family dynamic side of this that have really learned a lot about some of the better ways to approach some of these things and think about it. And, you might want to reach out to somebody, or we know somebody that we have on our team that you might want to chat with. But that's really it. It's normalizing, and it's hard. It needs normalizing because the stereotype is, this is great. What would be better than winning the lottery or selling your business and having a few hundred million or more, right? What would be better? It's really, really tricky. And so normalizing for the client, this is not as easy as the world or the movies would have it, have you think it is. And there's people who've really studied this, and often there's, psychologists and people from that world who've really looked at this and worked with families like yours, and they have some ideas about how to do this well.
And that's such a good point, because we've all normalized therapy, right? People talk about therapy all the time as something being, mainstream, but we haven't talked about it from like a financial family dynamic perspective, right? That's such a different topic. Many times these wealthy families don't even want to talk about wealth with their children. And so that kind of leads me to the next question. So today we're talking about how to have these financial discussions during the holidays with family. And so how do family dynamics and parenting influence? How do you see it influencing the next generations, and maybe even beyond that, their relationship with money and wealth? And how do families deal with this better together?
I mean, it's everything, right? Those early years, kids are learning. By the time they're 5, they have so much of their personality solidified, and their values and just their attitudes about life, their sense of responsibility or their sense of entitlement. A lot of that is already formed. So much of it, these discussions about money around the holidays go back to, what have you done so far, right? Give me 5 different families. I'll ask each one of them, what have you done so far? That really affects the answer. And what have you done in those early years? Did you have your 2 or 3-year-old help set the table, right? Even a 2-year-old can put a napkin next to each play setting. And after dinner, the 2-year-old can throw them in the garbage, or if they're cloth napkins, put them in the washing machine, and even go further, put them in the washing machine, these cloth napkins, put in the detergent if it's like a little pellet or sheet or something that they can do, and press start, right? For a 2-year-old, pressing start on a dishwasher or a washing machine is a life-changing ecstasy. For a 17-year-old, it's not such a life-changing ecstasy, right? But the point is that the point of that right there is that the things that you want your 17 or 25-year-old to be doing are amazingly appealing to a 2 or 3-year-old. Take advantage of it, right? If you're doing something that is going to give them a habit that's going to be amazingly useful that you want them to have later, and they absolutely love it, it's a win-win. And that's really why I started going so young in my work with these families, because what could be easier than letting little kids do things that they absolutely love that you want them to do later? And if you wait until later, it's a complete misery and conflict. So much of my answer has to do with, what have you done so far, and how have you handled all of this stuff? You're right. A lot of people don't want to talk about money. And I think this came up in our last few minutes. I like to say you can talk about family wealth without even mentioning money. Then when you're ready, you can talk about money without using exact numbers. And that really is something I've come up with that really helps a lot of families feel more comfortable. How do you talk about family wealth without mentioning money? You tell stories about the family that have nothing to do with the business, right? Leaving the old country and how you got here and what you might have gone through, right? In my family's situation, it was really escaping war and barely even making it, right? Being the only one. We're only here because he had the guts to run away. So by telling them stories that have nothing to do with money, and then telling stories about how the business was started, right? Who started this business? How did they do it? What was hard about it? Those are amazingly meaningful to young children. And you didn't say anything about money or wealth or rich. You're telling stories that are related, but it has to do with the family history. And there's a lot of good research actually about telling stories to young children and their emotional health and development. Researchers, who I'm blanking on their name right now, were working on just this. They noticed that kids who knew a lot about their family's history had some kind of resilience, and they were studying this in New York City during right before 9/11 happened and the towers were attacked. So they had this group of kids they were studying, and they all were living in New York City when this happened. So they studied them again after 9/11, and there were only 20 questions in this kind of research study. And it were things like, do you know where your parents met? Do you know where your grandparents came from, or what kind of job they did? 20 questions like that. The more of those 20 questions that a child could answer, the better adjusted they were and less traumatized after September 11th. So they had this sort of natural, awful, traumatic event, and they were able to compare before and after. But it's super powerful, this idea of telling stories. It not only helps them to put the family's wealth in context, but there's a sense of being part of something bigger than yourself that I think helps character development, but also just resilience and grit and general happiness even.
Well, you mentioned how knowing your grandfather's story was just so impactful. You probably saw your dad in a different light at that point in time, right? Just because you've never realized, just your family in general, what they had to be through or had to go through to be where you are today. I think from time to time now, I do it as a parent. Unfortunately, we think we shelter our kids from something to protect them. But really, that's such a great point that the more they know and the more honest you're with them, the more they're going to appreciate everything that they're able to have or we're able to give them as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And the researchers, and again, I'm blanking on the name, but can get it for you. I always want to give credit. They found that it was important to tell an oscillating narrative style. So going up and down, not just telling stories where things ended well, and not just because if everything ends well, the kids think, oh, life's easy. And if you say tell only stories where things end poorly, they're going to be depressed and feel like it's not even worth trying. But there's something in giving them a balance of really how life is that was the most powerful.
So when we're, thinking back again to we're spending time with our family over the holidays, taking advantage of the time we're together because we don't always get to be together. How do you create a kind of like a safe space, right, to be able to start these conversations and encourage some of that vulnerability or honesty, but that leads to productive, respectful conversation? It's not to lead to conflict, right? How do you start to what do you recommend to create that safe space?
Again, what kind of safe spaces have you had before? You're asking me this question. I'm sorry to keep giving you the same answer, but every family is different. So hopefully you've done some things, and parents have walked the walk around showing a sense of vulnerability, talking about what they struggle with, what's hard. Hopefully they've talked about money with the kids or grandkids, depending on who's at this holiday dinner gathering or conversation that we're talking about having. How much do they know? How much have they talked about money in general? Do little kids have some kind of saving system where they can maybe make some money and save some and spend some? And have they talked to little kids about giving? I mean, that's sort of three areas that I think are really important: saving, spending, and then sharing. Have they done any of that? If they haven't, and you're trying to have a conversation with a bunch of 20-year-olds who aren't good at saving, they spend a lot, and they're not thinking about sharing, and your values are around at least saving somewhat, being thoughtful about spending, and being philanthropic, then there's a real chasm between the values of the parents and the values of the kids. So all those things come into play. If your next generation is not handling things the way you wish they would have, I think there's a way to do that in kind of a safe space, which is, and I just wrote a blog on this last month called Falling on Your Sword, which is to say that you may, as a parent, have to say, hey, I'd like to have a conversation about money. And I think that your mom and I could have done some things differently. And I wish we would have. Saving has been really important to us. It's not that important to you guys. Helping other people has been really important. It's not that important to you guys. I wonder if we could have a conversation about maybe the things mom and I did that led you to handle things the way you're handling it. And if you're open to looking at things in a different way, because I think there are some important things that could be missing if you're not good at saving and if you're not thoughtful about how you give back to the world. Like that's a way of saying, hey, we might have made a mistake here. And in a lot of situations, the next generation will feel some sympathy and say, no, 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 it's not your fault. We're just having fun. We care about those things. We're just not living our lives that way because we're young, but let's talk about it. And other times it can turn into a head banging. We're living our own lives. Don't tell us what to do. And that's another scenario. But I think for the parents to start off and lead by example with humility, to talk about things they might have wished they had done differently, or certainly to compliment the kids on what they have done well. You can never go wrong with a sincere compliment, and then shift into there are some other areas we want to discuss where we think some changes might be needed. But in terms of the money itself, what has been done? Have they talked about estate planning? Have the parents talked to the kids, depending on their age, about who's going to be in charge of healthcare decisions, who's going to be an executor, all right, especially as the parents get older, which I think it's a mistake to wait until you're 70 or 80 or 90. These are conversations to have with kids when they're younger. One day we're not going to be around, and there are things we're putting in place when you're really young, somebody else we have on paper to take care of you. And it can be upsetting, but there's a way that you can talk to kids about things that are probably never going to happen. But if they did, and one of the ways I like to put it, and along the lines of emotional safety, is, if mom and I were abducted by aliens and they never bring us back to Earth, who would take care of you? And they laugh, and they know we're kind of talking about if we die, but it's a funny way of saying it. But still, they know that there is something in place, and it has to do with who will take care of you, but also our money is going to go into something called a trust. And you can explain to even a little kid, a trust is like a special place where someone takes care of it until you're old enough to be able to take care of it yourself. So those are a lot of different angles on the whole family money conversation. Were there more specifics you were hoping I would address?
No, that's great. I mean, what I kind of heard too is be vulnerable yourself, right? So put yourself in a position where they can see you're not perfect. Kris and I talk about parenting all the time. We both have small children, 7-year-old. He has an 8-year-old and a 5-year-old now. And so my daughter tends to be a perfectionist. And a while back, it was actually a therapist that said, make sure you tell her when you make a mistake so she can see that mistakes are normal, that just happens. And so I pointed out, like, if I spill something, I drop something, I make a mistake, I make it a point to say, hey, look, I do this too. I broke the cup, this happens. I spilled the water. It happens to all of us. So something that you said was, from what I gathered, it's also be vulnerable in this sense and say, I didn't always do it perfect. So I want to have these conversations. And also, they may not even be thinking about it. I mean, I know, Kris, you and I work with families where we have the 80-year-old grandparent, and then we have the parents in the middle, and then we have the 20-year-old that is just living life. Like you said, Jeff, they don't really care about what's happening in the estate planning world these days, or if who's the president, or what tax changes are going to happen. So we see this all the time, right, Kris?
Yeah, no, totally. Yeah, they just they don't know what's going on, right? You talk about you got one part, you have the sandwich generation, and those two generations are just trying to figure out things amongst themselves, much less trying to even go down to the third one. Like, generation 1 and generation 2 haven't figured it out yet. How is it supposed to get all the way down to generation 3 and have them understand, what's actually going on with those family dynamics? This is a fun conversation. We in our house, we do our best to, you kind of pointed out, like own our own mistakes, and we actually allow kids to call us out on our mistakes as well. So we're not just allowed to ignore. I can't sweep things under the rug because they call me out on things. I think that's a fun one that we do ourselves in our house. And I was thinking just kind of generally about what you're saying, and I think one key here is that it takes work, right? It takes time and it takes effort to be able to build these relationships and have these conversations with families. You were mentioning being able to push the start button on the dishwasher, right? So we do that with our family. The kids have to load up their own dishes. Inevitably, my younger drops rice all over the floor from start to finish, but she put it in the dishwasher quickly, and that was it. Like, I'll go clean up the rest of the stuff because I just wanted to get from point A to point B, but I know that's going to put more work on me. And so I think that, as I'm hearing this conversation kind of go, like it takes a lot of work, and it takes effort on everybody's part to actually have it done right.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. It does. A lot of these things that I'm talking about take more work. To have a 2-year-old put a napkin at each of 6 or 7 plates is a lot longer. It's going to take a lot longer than for an adult to just do it. But it's not about, efficiency in the moment, which you might need as a busy parent. And sometimes you'll go for it. It's about, planting seeds for the long term. Also, I remember the reference. It's Duke and Five-ish are the researchers that did the 20 questions research. So wanted to give them credit on that.
And so, Jeff, we talked about different generations. So this is, I think sometimes a big part of the problem. I know my mom and I have different perspectives on money and investment. Just yesterday, I was having a conversation with her, and she's like, "What do you mean investing in the stock market? That is so dangerous." Because she doesn't really understand that we actually invest some of my brother and I help her with her finances. We invest some of her own money, but I can't tell her that because she will panic. So how do you bridge the gap when you do have multiple generations in a room that are having really important conversations about things like estate planning and inheritances, and one day you're going to get married, and if you get a divorce, we put your money in a trust to protect it. How do you bridge the gap between the generations to have those conversations?
Yeah, I think you've got to make it a family culture thing about having discussions about money and other important topics like death and healthcare decisions, all of these things, and just sort of how you live life. I think if you integrate it in along the way, there will be a precedent for having deep conversations about difficult things. And I think another important thing is the idea of vision and values. Does the family have a vision for how wealth is going to serve the
Mhm.
family and the greater world? Do they agree? Where they don't agree, is there flexibility? If dad is convinced that giving, money for heart disease because of his own father, that's the way that the family's wealth should go. But maybe one of the grandkids would really like to see money go toward homelessness because of experience they had volunteering at a shelter. That's a great way to get some more cohesiveness, is to not just go with the patriarch, the founders idea of how the wealth should be used, but to be open to ideas from other people. That's how you're going to get buy-in from the kids and the grandkids, is by sort of giving your sense of where the wealth came from and how hard you worked to create it and what it means to you, how you'd like it to serve the family. But the families that are really successful, there's a sense of openness and flexibility to what's important to you. Do you have ideas that are fruitful and productive and fit with the values that we hopefully all share, and that we can consider together?
It's a funny, interesting you say that. There was on the flip side of that, and not to turn this into a sad moment, but I think we need to face reality. Talking about, we have to make sure that we're talking about what is actually happening. We worked with a family several years ago where the grandfather, the father, all the children after that, sons and daughters, were all in the same business. And I can tell you that Generation 3 was miserable. They did not want to be in this business. They hated being there every day. They just went because they were essentially forced to be part of the family business. And eventually, one of them, the youngest, just decided, forget this. I'm just going to take the money, whatever money you want to give me, and I'm just going to live whatever life I can live. And he ended up, being addicted to drugs, and eventually passed away because he was so miserable in this setting, and there was no flexibility of being able to do things different. You're going to do it the way it's always been done. And
Yeah,
so
yeah.
that's an extreme example, but it's the reality. Sorry.
I'm with you.
Okay,
Forgive me. I was just
no, it's
grabbing
okay.
a book that's about that topic.
Yeah,
I don't know if you can see it.
we cannot see it. It's
It
hard to
is
see.
The Legacy of Inherited Wealth, and it's about 15 stories. It's by Barbara Bluen, who is an inheritor in an extremely wealthy family. It's about 15 stories, interviews with people who inherited from really large families, and then the sort of the negative experiences they had with self-esteem, with drugs, with suicide, relationships. It's really powerful, especially going back to what we were saying earlier about so many people think what could be better than winning the lottery or being born in a family where you're going to get tens or hundreds of millions given to you. It's tough, and drug abuse rates are higher. They correlate with wealth. I just grabbed that. Forgive me for walking on
No, no,
screen
it's
for a
okay.
moment, but
No,
I just want to
that's
say that
great.
there's actually a
Yeah.
book about what you were talking about, and the interviews are it's known for being really dark,
Yep.
these stories, and sad.
And unfortunately, we see that a lot. Like, I mean, not to that extreme, but I know Kris and I have many times come across families that, where that's the case. And as they say in the hip hop world, more money, more problems, right? So we
Yeah,
think
yeah.
people tend to think money is going to fix things. And when you actually have it, it can lead to a lot of problems if it's not balanced properly. On the other side, we have other families we work with that have family retreats that have these
Yes.
conversations and that are thriving because every generation, has this education, this understanding, but they're also given the flexibility to be their own people, right? So it's very, very different. Well, that's definitely helpful. Kris, I don't know if you have any questions, follow-up questions for Jeff on that or any other comments.
No, not. I mean, I like statistics too, Jeff, and I was thinking about this conversation where it was headed to. And like this was an Edward Jones study. It said 71% of families say that they're comfortable talking about money matters, et cetera, to their family, but only 27% had actually taken any steps to start having those conversations. And to your point, Celeste, that rides, both sides of wealth and really the entire wealth spectrum, I suppose. But that's an interesting statistic when you think about, oh yeah, sure, it's no problem. But then the reality of it is like, it actually doesn't happen.
And there's
Yeah, and I can give you a little more powerful example of that. That's a little edgy, so bear with me. But I still have a small therapy practice. Most of my time is in this consulting world, but I have a small therapy practice. And, people can come to me 60, 70, even 80 years old. And in doing an assessment, I'll ask about sex and even pornography and even self-stimulation sorts of things. And I'm trying to keep it rated G here. But these are things that are normal to ask about in an assessment with a new client. And they, even 60s, 70s, 80-year-olds don't have a problem. I've had an 80-year-old woman recently talk about an affair she had for 40 years, and she talked about it with no shame. Ask them about their income or their net worth, or really important as a therapist, debt. A lot of therapists don't even ask, but people can be in trouble with debt. A lot of therapists don't ask. Ask some of those people about how much they have on their credit card, if they have any kind of debt, and how much. And they are like, there's a moral indignation. You just told me all these sexual private things about yourself, and asking you if you have any debt and how much is like just too far. It's really, it's more taboo than sex has ever been, I think.
That is so interesting how psychologically, that our financials are so important to our identity that we don't want
Yeah.
to share. We're willing to share all the things. I'm sure she's like, let's talk about the affair again, right? Instead of
Right.
instead of what debt I have, which is that is fascinating to see that. No, absolutely. So I know you personally have developed some tools within your practice, some programs to help facilitate these conversations. I don't know if you can talk a little bit about the things that you're using and other tools that you recommend families use.
Yeah, so one thing I have, and there's a lot of versions of this out here, is this little deck of cards. Again, the lighting might not be great, but it's values cards. And I run various exercises with families. There's 30 something, different values on these cards. And just as an example, I'll just pull some out, creativity, the ability to transcend traditional ideas, rules, patterns, and relationships, or effectiveness, being able to successfully produce a desired or intended result. I'll do one more. Independence, freedom from the control, influence, and support of others. And so I have people go through these and pick out their top 5, which can be hard. You can have 10 or 20 or 30 values, and that's great. If you could, for the sake of the exercise, pick 5 and or 3, if you can manage it, to whittle it down, and then, say how you give an example how you live by each of these values. And then, and this is something that I think is missed in my field, is not enough people say, how do you fall short? How do you live by your values? How do you fall short? And what's simple, specific thing can you do to better live by your values? That's really crucial.
Mhm.
How do you fall short, and how can you do a better job? Everyone can pick wonderful things and say, these are my values, but now let's go a little deeper. Are you walking the walk, and can you do better, and do you want to do better? And if you don't want to do better, are these really your values? And what are you showing the people in your family and in your world if you're not, really walking the walk on them? So some kind of values work. families in this world that we're in now, consultants like me and wealth management firms commonly nowadays will do some kind of family mission statement development where what does it mean to be a family? And just like a business has a mission statement, have a family mission statement that a family comes up with. Hopefully all the generations can be involved depending on the ages of people. I have the Purposeful Legacy Family Project, which is the resource that I've developed to help parents around raising kids, and I do a lot of creative things there, working with much younger kids than the parents or the family think are capable. And I often have to argue for like a 6 or 7 or an 8-year-old to be involved. One exercise I do is wants and needs. What are wants and what are needs? How are they different? And we'll have a discussion. Pretty much every family gets to, needs. You'll die without needs, right? Oxygen, food, shelter, clothing. And then there are wants, and we'll go back and forth. And I had this 8-year-old boy whose parents and older siblings, he had some much older siblings, just thought he was too young, and it just didn't make sense. Like, why? They thought it would burden the kid to torture him through a meeting like this. Please trust me. I work with young children much younger than him, and I know what he's capable of, and I've met him. So they let him in, and we're doing the wants and needs, and he put friendship on the needs, right? And everybody, oh, no, you're not going to die without friends. You're going to die if you don't have food, but you're not going to die without friends. And he said, a life without friends is not a life worth living. I think friends are a need. And he made his little 8-year-old case, and people were crying. And the kid that nobody thought would be interested or useful in the meeting was the most brilliant. And I find that young kids often have that level of wisdom. And so I love when I could get my hands on a 5 or 6 or 7-year-old to be in one of these meetings and bring their innocence and their truth. It's really just beautiful.
Well, they don't have those inhibitions yet, right? I mean, I think Kris and I live this daily with our children, but they're not yet jaded by whatever has happened in life to have those inhibitions.
Yeah, I think it's two things, right? Maybe they're not jaded, but they're also very perceptive about what's going on around. That's what I'm shocked about with my kids, is that like even if there's an undertone and it's like unintended for them to understand it, they still pick up on those things, and it comes out or it manifests itself, later in other ways. But yeah, I mean, I think that's a great point, Jeff. If you're like those types of conversations, understanding, where like that kind of a question gives you an indication of where your kid's at as well. And, friendship, I mean, my goodness, like, is that friendships within the family? Is that friendships, external of the family? There's so many different avenues you can take it down. And what are they seeing, at their parents when they're thinking about friendship? Because they're seeing that. There's a reason they bring that up, right? It's not just, oh, I just want my friends. It's much bigger than that.
Yeah.
Yeah, kids definitely add a lot of value and bring us back down to earth many times. And we don't give them the credit, or sometimes don't think they can do the things that we want them to do or other people expect them to do. So yeah, we definitely need to give them more credit. So Jeff, in talking, and as families are having these conversations, especially once again, if we're going to be with our family around the holidays, what are some of the most crucial topics on the financial side that are overlooked, that families are just not talking about? So forget, like the traditional stuff, but what are maybe other things that are commonly overlooked between families that are important for them? Maybe it's already taken some work and they've already talked about the foundational stuff. What's the other things that they're missing?
I mean, there can often be something lurking around fairness, even if all these things have technically been discussed. And so opening the door for, people to talk about, if you're talking about sort of the family's estate planning, what do people think about it? Does this seem fair to everyone? What are your thoughts on it? I really would like to have your reactions on it, because often there is some sense of unfairness, not always, but it's pretty common. And it usually deeply has something to do with you wondering if you're as loved as your siblings. There's a lot of competition between siblings. And so a lot of these things come down to feeling like maybe you're not loved as much as your brothers and sisters. And if you can bring that up, it's a real opportunity to kind of clarify and heal before somebody passes away, rather than not trying to go for that and then dying and leaving somebody feeling like, yeah, I guess they kind of love me, but not as much as my brothers and sisters. And usually there's some experience or two or three or 10 that feed into that person's mind. But if you can have a conversation, you can really clear up some things that lead to kind of a beautiful sense of clarity. Is that the kind of thing you were looking for in that
Yeah,
question?
yeah, because it's different. We don't think about it, right? Parents think, "Oh, I love all my children equally," which may be true or not. I don't know. I have one, so I don't know, Kris. You tell me, but not now, not on camera, because one day this will be viewed.
Equal,
Yeah,
completely equal.
yeah,
I like
absolutely.
to say equally, but differently. The
Yeah,
relationships with
It is
each of my
different.
sons are very different. They're different people that we push each other's buttons in different ways. I love them both absolutely to death, and they're different relationships based on how I annoy them, how they annoy me, all of that.
yeah, absolutely. But that's such an important topic. I mean, I jokingly call my brother the golden child for reasons, obviously. My brother's sister says that he's the favorite, things like that, because we've all had experiences that maybe at some point we think, oh, well, that other person has it easier, whether it's true or not, or that's just our own perception of it.
Yeah.
Yes.
So along these lines, let me throw in the importance of a sense of humor. I think in life in general, a sense of humor is great. My family has really a wonderful sense of humor. And in addition to all the craziness and intensity and conflict that goes along with being a family, but we tease each other, me and my older sister and younger sister, about who's the favorite. And something will happen and someone will say, ah, see, there it is. I'm the favorite. So as we got married, my mom has a spot in her house where she has a picture of the bride and groom for each of us. And my older sister was married first, so she went on the wall. And then when I got married, my picture just happened to go underneath it, and then the younger sisters underneath it. So when we would visit, somebody would sneak over there and rearrange them so that they were the highest, and the order would change. And we had this like ongoing thing. And I'd show up at my mom's. Okay, who is? I see Donna was here. She's on top. But then the next generation, my older sister's daughter got married, and she on her own made up a picture of her and her husband and got on a ladder and stuck it like close to the ceiling above all three of us, and without telling anyone. And every time any one of us saw it, it was hilarious. So it's a way of taking this thing that could be a sort of a painful thing and just gives us a sense of perspective and makes us realize how insane we are and laugh with a sense of love.
I agree with you. Humor is so important. I tell people all the time, I'm like, I can't take myself that seriously because it's too exhausting. There's a lot of other things to take serious in life, So absolutely, I agree. Humor is so important. I'll tell you a funny story within my husband's family. It was a graduation for the youngest of the grandchildren, a high school graduation, and he was opening up his gifts and opening up his cards. And the grandmother wrote, "To my favorite grandchild." He read it out loud. You can just imagine that has been talked about ever since, well, you're the favorite grandchild, so
Wow, yeah.
People definitely take it seriously. So yeah, that was exactly it. Those kinds of things that maybe we don't think are truly financial in nature, but as the wealth grows, those differences, that fairness becomes even more imperative, or having those conversations, because what a parent views as fair might be different than what, the children or one child views as fair and balanced.
It kind of comes down trying to figure out a way to ask a better question, like to the children. Because if you're concerned about there's a fairness issue, then there probably is a fairness issue. I feel like you're really, really concerned about it. So I'm just kind of curious, Jeff, your reaction to this. Like if you're going to your kid, oh, hey, are you worried about fairness? Like what's a better way to bring that up and just sort of, get the dialogue moving on that, other than saying, hey, do you think I'm a terrible parent to you?
All for directness. So for example, I said, so my older son, engineering degree, got a job, making really good money. He's on his own and just kind of kicking butt financially. His younger brother had like a crappy first job that he didn't love. He left, got certified as a personal trainer, which he always wanted to do. And it's hard getting clients at first. And so we're paying for his health insurance, but his older brother got a job right away with health insurance. So I actually said to my older son, I said, hey, we're paying Matthew's health insurance. We never had to do that for you. Do you have any feelings about that? Do you feel like we're giving him resources and you're not getting an equal amount? Some families look at it that way. He said, no, I have no issue at all. I know he doesn't make that much money and it really helps him. I have health insurance through my work, and I'm really cool with it. So that doesn't answer your question because it was sort of how to be direct.
You're getting ahead of it. Yeah, you're getting ahead of it. Right.
But I think to answer your question directly the way that you asked it, like give me an example of the kind of conversation that you're wondering about. It is it like the fairness thing?
Yeah, yeah, totally. Yeah, yeah. The fairness thing.
Yeah, yeah, like, guys, what do you think about this plan and how it's set up? Right? Do you understand it? Do you have any questions about it? Is there anything that you're not asking, but you kind of want to ask, but you feel bad? And just sort of encouraging them to speak up. Is that still more aggressive than you were thinking?
No, not necessarily. No, I love the directness. I mean, if that's it, that's it. Like I like it actually.
I think so. I'm a fan of directness. Like whatever it is, I'm afraid that you guys might be harboring some discomfort over how we set this up. If anyone feels uncomfortable with any part of this, bring it up now. I don't know that it's going to change, but let's open it up. Let's talk about it. Maybe it is something that changes, or maybe it's something that doesn't change, but we can explain why your mom and I did it this way. And let's see what happens through a conversation
See,
and at
but
least open it.
a lot of important things are you asked the question. You took the time to so many times what we see, and I'm generalizing, but with a lot of wealthy families, they're not even asking the question. And they're saying, this is how I'm going to do it for you. And this is what I think is right. So there's no opportunity for the children, the next generations to get involved and express those feelings because there's never been that's never been an option for them. So I think even just what you said is asking the question, getting their opinion, making them feel involved is something that is incredibly hard. We're saying like it's so easy, but it's incredibly hard. But at the same time, it's the only way to big picture, if we're just talking about money, lead to financial success. We see families on the other side where there's so much just separation and so much issues with the family that it really does lead to financial kind of dilution. And then we have these other families that have governance structures. And once again, these retreats and are together and open. And we're working with a family right now where, and that's going to lead me to another question, but family where, most of the families together on this, and then there's one child that's been kind of, excluded from the family at this point. But the other side is very open and has this dialogue regularly. So I think it's asking the question and allowing people to get involved as their capabilities permit, right? Age, knowledge, maturity, all of those things play in. But that does lead me to my next question.
Can I ask you to hold on for 30 seconds?
Yes, go ahead.
If you go Google Fair Process Harvard Business Review, the first hit will be a brief article that talks about this research that shows when people are given a chance to have a voice about an important decision, even if the decision does not go the way that they want it to, they're more satisfied when the decision goes their way, but no one ever asked them what they thought about it. Think about that. I love this for all the families I work with because it goes to the heart of this. A voice does not equal a vote. You can ask people to express their feelings and give input. And this research says that that's really more important than the actual decision in most cases.
An audience, that's all we need for today. We're done. That was great advice. That is great advice, though, because it's so true. I mean, it's just hard for families to really put that into action, though, many times. And once again, I'm generalizing because there are some great families that do, but it is hard sometimes. But that's such a great way to put it. I really love that. So what about kind of as we're wrapping up and now, we've talked about how to open up the conversations, what to talk about, what you're not talking about, how to make yourself vulnerable and include the family. But what about that situation I just mentioned? It's where now there's this child that I'm sure parents still love. And I've seen this with multiple families. I know Kris has as well, but they have been excommunicated from the family because they married the wrong person or because they chose a sexual orientation that the family is against, things like that. And it's all serious and meaningful. But how do you help families navigate that type of situation? Do you just say, well, you're never going to talk to them again, it's fine? Or is there a way to, help them come all back together if they want to, of course, if they want to do the work?
Yeah. Well, you hit it right there at the end. Are you willing to sit down with me, an outside professional with expertise in this kind of thing? And in my case, it's, sort of family dynamics and communication and an understanding of sort of wealth and that world. I think it's a good combination to find someone like that when you're looking for that kind of conversation. Are you willing to sit down in a room with me, or even one-on-one at first to talk about a way that we might all sit down in the same room. If someone's just unwilling to take any of those steps, one-on-one with me or sit with me as a family as a whole, then there's really not much you can do. And people do go their own way. There have been articles recently in the last year about, cutting off parents and cutting off from your family. And, it's kind of controversial because some therapists are recommending it. Is that really the best thing? They never even talk to the parents. They're telling their patient to cut off from the parents. And there's a lot of sort of pros and cons and confusion and all of that. But ultimately, in the situation you're talking about, do people want to try to have something better? Are they willing to say, yes, I'd like to try to have something better. I'm willing to put in some effort. And then that's really an area for expertise. I can't really explain the process of it. It comes from 30 years as a psychoanalyst and family therapist. But if people are willing to, in general, I'm going to say, what would make this, a successful engagement working with me? What is it you want to see? What is it you need from your parents? What is it you need from your child or your siblings? And then from there, help them move toward those goals with skilled facilitations and asking questions, asking them to be curious, helping them to develop ground rules for the meetings. I have a whole list that I'll share with families after they've really done an exhaustive attempt at coming up with their own ground rules. So families are great at coming up with these things. They know what, let's be respectful. Let's let everybody talk, right? And then I'll show them a list that is taken from families I work with over the 30 years, like my favorite 30. And I'll say, okay, you got your 6 ground rules or 4 ground rules. If you had to pick 1 or 2 from this list that you think make it even better, what are they? And that's the sort of general process. But if you don't have everybody willing to at least experiment, and I'll put it that way, sometimes, hey, let's not commit. Let's do an experiment. How about I meet with each one of you in this family once, one-on-one, and then we come together. I'll tell you a little bit about what I learned and make some suggestions, but we could stop after 3, and anybody could say, I'm done after 3, and we'll do an experiment. That's another way to get a tough situation going.
Yeah. And so kind of as you go back, holiday situation, these conversations, it's not like you're just going to sit down with them once and the all world problems, all your financial issues are going to be solved, right? It has to be an ongoing conversation. To Kris's point, it takes work, takes commitment. So how do you recommend families maintain this ongoing open dialogue, especially when you have families that are now internationally separated? And I know we have a lot of technology, Zoom, but how can families continue to stay connected, have this open dialogue, even when they're not always, able to be together?
Yeah, it's in some ways it's even easier. And families are like doing the kind of work that I do with me more easily than they would have, because they don't have to be in the same place. Clients I work with, I'm sure you too, someone's in Rome, somebody's in South Beach in Miami, someone's in the Hamptons, someone's in New York City. To get them in the same room used to be a real ordeal, and I wouldn't see them as frequently. I worked a family where 2 brothers were having a tough time, sort of running the company together. And mom and dad were really good people, raised good kids, and they were ready to step away right off. And the mom and dad aren't ready to step away. Let's face it, it's usually the dad who's not ready to step away. And the whole engagement took a year, which was really quick. I mean, complete transition of ownership, leadership, everything done in a year, because we did Zoom, and it allowed them to have conversations more frequently. So they weren't in the same room, but they had more conversations in that year than they had many years. And it's powerful. The technology. I was doing it before COVID, but if there's a silver lining, COVID really showed us that there's ways to really stay connected when we're not in the same place, and we can make more use of them.
And I guess it's also making it a consistent effort, right? We have families that ensure they have these quarterly meetings or annual retreats, things that are ongoing, so that as new generations, new family members, new spouses join, they can continue to be integrated, but also build on what they've already worked on. So, I mean, we've shared a lot today. And I know some of this, we've made it seem like, well, you just need to do this. It takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of questions. It takes time. It takes professionals like you that can help guide these really important conversations. I think that's another key takeaway for anybody, listening, our audience, is you don't have to do it alone. There are folks that are professionals like yourself that can help guide these conversations in a meaningful and productive way that is beneficial across the board, for everybody, versus just a one-sided conversation from the parents about how you need to save more money, you need to, invest here, you need to give money to this charity. You get to be that happy median that brings them all together. Well, one last thing, before we conclude today, if there was one thing you would share that, some kind of takeaway, actionable item that folks can implement today, what is the one piece of advice you would give families in general as we kind of wrap up today?
It's so simple, but I think it really comes down to, walk the walk as parents as soon as your kids are born, because they see what you do and not what you hear. I mean, not what you say. It's not as powerful. And frequently parents have this ideal of how they want the kids to be, but they're kind of different. So I'd say walking the walk, and it sounds small and simple, but it's a big deal. If you believe in giving, don't just write checks that your kids don't even know were written, and don't just tell them that he wrote a check. Go to the animal shelter, go to the homeless shelter, go to the cancer research clinic or the cancer hospital where you can maybe talk to people, or bring your dog to visit people. Like, connect your values to real everyday life. So walk the walk on your values from the earliest days. It's really the best thing you can do.
Yeah, absolutely. Kris?
Awesome. And yeah, just to throw this in there, I was worried you might say, have a conversation about where you fall on the like the debt Viagra or the Dave Ramsey Viagra quadrant of happiness. I'm glad you didn't say that. I'm glad it was what you said. So
I don't even know what that is. But
it's a new tool. You just discovered it today. I didn't know it existed.
There's a lot of tools out there. Well, Jeff, thank you so much. I know that our audience can definitely benefit from what you shared and from connecting with you. So we'll make sure that we include all of your contact information and links to your resources as well, because these are, we joke about it, but it's important conversations, whether you're wealthy or not. But for the wealthy, to your point, there's more at stake, there's more involved. And it's important for them to be able to feel comfortable, have these conversations at the holidays or not. So thank you so much, Jeff. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. It was fun.
For our audience, if you're looking to dive deeper into this topic or connect with Jeff, we will include his contact information along with some other helpful resources in our show notes. And remember, although these conversations can be very daunting, they're very important for the long-term financial success of your family and, of course, family harmony. Join us next time as we kick off the new year. Now that we know who the next president's going to be, we will be discussing post-election landscape changes specifically for business owners. We'll be talking about both macro and micro impacts to your business. So make sure to join us for that. That is all for today. If you enjoyed what we shared today, please like, subscribe, and share our podcast. Hopefully, we made your holidays a little bit less stressful and a little bit more cheerful with the content we shared today. As always, thank you so much for joining us for another episode of Planning Reimagined, where your wealth journey meets our expert insights. From all of us at Rob & Glenn, we wish you and your loved ones the happiest of holidays. See you in 2025. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And please be sure to follow on your favorite podcast player. To connect with us, you can email us at hello@robandglenn.com or schedule some time with us via the link in the show notes. You can also find us on Instagram and TikTok at Hello Rob & Glenn.